Okay, welcome everybody. What a great session. You are my caffeine for the day, having all you people here. So this is we're all here for 70-410, correct? Okay, good. That's what we're here for. How's your night going so far? Good stuff, yeah. I know a lot of people. Yeah, we know a lot of people, but yeah, very good. So we're here for 70-410, the exam preparation certification. My name is Mark Grimes. I'm a senior consultant with Microsoft Consulting Services. Been here about 5 years. Before that, I was with a gold partner for 5 years. And before that, I lived and breathed being an MCT 10 years straight. So I've been an MCT. I just renewed for my 18th year. So although I'm not practicing day in, day out, I do stuff like this internally and externally to keep active. As they do in the Channel 9 IS for IT Pros event, they go, one thing about me you may not know. I am proud of the fact that I've actually run 10 marathons successfully and 3 of them here in Chicago. Yay. Thank you. I can't run a mile now to save my life. That was back before kids. All right. So let me break this down for you the way I do internally. And in getting ready for the exam, hopefully you know about this, right? Microsoft.com/learning. You search for that, and then the exam number, 70-410. That then gives you the skills measured. That is your, whatever you want to call it, your dictionary, your encyclopedia, your roadmap. You must follow that. Because if you do not, you're going to miss areas, right? So what we do when we try to build these decks is that we actually go in as a trainer, we go in and look at that, and we build this section by section. We basically do a work breakdown structure, just like you do in a project, right? We do a work breakdown structure of the skills measured, and then we try to get some of the points. I can't get them all. I tried that in the last session. It was 120 slides. But I did it because it's Azure, and Azure is very new, and most people don't know a lot of things. Hopefully, in Server 2012, if you've been around a little bit, you've been around Server 2008 or 2003, you're going to know some more stuff, right, fundamentally speaking. So here's my promise and my goal to help you out. I've done a lot of that homework. This presentation has actually been reused several times. I started it, someone else did it, and then it ended up coming back to me. And what we do is we try to find resource references, links, tips, and tricks. My goal, and if I do this, I think I did a good job. It's a pretty simple objective. If I can get you 3 to 5, 7 tips or tricks that can tip you up a little bit, that could be the difference between passing and not passing. Because most people, when they study and don't pass, they miss it by 3 to 5 points, right? Or questions. So that is my absolute goal here to help you out with that. I went ahead and put this. So if there's anything you want to write down, and I'll tell you why this, even though it doesn't look right, aka.ms/migrate/2008R2. Please write that down, and I'll tell you why. I recently did an upgrade project from 2008 R2 to 2012 R2, so I found all the what's new stuff. Right? And I have a blog where I've posted all that. So that's going to get you a lot of the links. So this deck isn't as full of links like my Azure deck is, but that site is. Anything that's brand new. And when it comes to studying and preparing, here's the 2 areas that are going to get you. Either A, it's going to be something that's new in Server 2012 and R2 that you just didn't know about, like you go, oh, I know group policy like the back of my hand. Well, did you know you could do remote GPOs? Right? Did you know you could do infrastructure management? There's all kind of new features they threw in there, right? So it's that new stuff, the deltas, that's going to get you. The other stuff that will get you, oh, I know printing. Yeah, printing, that's easy, right? But have you really looked at the permissions lately and configure that? Most people don't, right? Just set it, forget it's done, or someone else manages it. Oh, I know DNS, but have you really gone through all the properties and all the zones and looked at how that all works? So sometimes that stuff that you think you know, but you may not. So in some of these areas, I'll dive down. I'm going to go old school. You know, okay, here are the permissions on NTFS versus share. Oh, thank you so much. Wow, you got all that. So that's a classic example. In almost every server exam, they do that. We got a bunch of shares. We have a bunch of network permissions. What are the effective permissions? And if you don't know the rules, you know, you can't answer that question. You can maybe guess at it. You might kind of know, but there's specific rules. Group policy application, how group policies apply. Very specific rules. Okay, so I'm going to go a little old school with that. Try to get to the new Delta stuff as well as some of the old school stuff that you may not have known about. And the goal is, if I can get you a couple points per section, that's going to be all good. So we trimmed down these slides compared to past tech eds and internal Microsoft events. We used to spend a lot of time in certification. Again, Microsoft.com/learning, search for exam 40-10, and that will tell you all you need to know. This has a breakdown, which I built my slides upon, and gives you what you need to know. Also, and it also talks about the subsequent exams. So this is the first exam. It's the basic install and configuring. 411 is once you've installed and configured, now you're going to be an admin. What do I need to do? Have I been there, done that? And again, there's a lot of stuff you probably have done, but there's probably a lot of stuff you never ever touch. Like, you ever configured RAS? Well, no, people don't do that, right? Do you do WSL? Got more. Well, I'm good with thanks. All right. WSS? Have you done? Oh, don't do that. So in the administrating, it's going to be things that you just may never do. And then exam 412, that's really when you get into the more advanced detailed sort of things. So again, that's all explained for you. And they actually have a bit.ly ignite-cert app as a shortcut. But just go to Microsoft.com/learning and search for the exam number. Also, this exam, depending on the certification you have in the past, if you're an MCSA, the old school MCSA or MCSE, there's exam options and upgrade pass. And that one exam, so for example, if you were an MCSA or MCSE Server 2008 R2, you can upgrade with one exam. But here's the thing, folks. If you do exam 70-417, that has components of the first three exams. So 410, 411, 412. Right? There's sections for each one of those. So it's a much, much beefier exam. So likewise, the level of effort is proportionate. And speaking of level of effort, I shared this in the last exam. For those of you who've either taken an exam or you haven't taken an exam or it's been a while, let me set the stage for you what kind of level of effort you should expect. If you live it, breathe it, do it day in, day out, and I mean all the things that are in the exam objectives, you might just be able to walk in and pass it. If you take this session, it's going to get you 3 to 5 and probably tip you over. So not a whole lot of level of effort. If you're at the other end of the spectrum, I don't do Server 2012. I wasn't really that good in 2008. No, I did NT4 a long time ago, but that was a long time ago. Right? I have very little base level knowledge. You can expect to spend at least 40 to 80 hours minimum. If you're somewhere in between, maybe you were a 2008 desktop support person, and I worked in Active Directory user computers, and I did new groups, new users, did some GPO, but a lot of the other stuff I didn't do. So I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. That's probably about 20, 40 hours. Okay? And best recommendation, too, is you got to love Windows 8. I can fire up Hyper-V. I can get a trial version of Server 2012, and I can run Server 2012 on my laptop. So that's one of the best things you can do is install and configure 2012. Or better yet, as we talked in the last one, get an Azure subscription trial day for 90 days. You don't have to build it. You just click a wizard, and boom, in 2 minutes, you'll have a Server 2012 server. It's all ready for you, right? You got to get your hands in it. You got to know the exam objectives, and that's how you're going to be successful. So this is the breakdown that we have for this one. So 6 sections. Yeah, they're almost always 6 sections. So installing configure servers, configuring server roles and features, configuring Hyper-V. This exam's big on Hyper-V. Okay, so if you're a VM shop and you don't do a lot of Hyper-V, get your hands dirty in it, right? And again, most everything, if you install Windows 8, you can configure Hyper-V. It works, looks, feels, smells the same as on a Server 2012. There might be some exceptions, but I don't think there's much, if at all. So get that going and run it and check out the properties. Configuring core networking services. And again, a lot of this stuff is going to be stuff, well, yeah, I know DNS, DHCP, all that stuff. But you got to look for the deltas. What's new, right? What are the best practices? So you may do things a certain way. So I always, MCTs, we always talk about there's the real world and then there's the exam world, right? So sometimes what we do, they match, but sometimes they're different, right? Because they may be looking at a larger global type configuration, what most people do, but that may not apply to you. So you have to kind of separate those two worlds. Install and administer Active Directory. This has radically changed. So if you have not played with Server 2012 and 2012 R2, and by the way, just to make this point clear, R2 is on this exam, very much so. So you got to know those deltas. And 2012 brought in a lot of things. And also, here's a real subtle thing, and it won't affect you so much in this exam, but I will mention this point real quick, even though I'm not doing the 412 session. When you get to advanced services, and I only know this because I live and breathe this day in, day out, I live, for the past 3 years, I've done literally nothing but ADFS and Web Application Proxy or UAG. So I'm setting up Federation all the time. It is hugely different between 2012 and R2. Massively different. Web application proxy didn't even exist on 2012. It does in R2. The way you can configure and install ADFS, totally different. Feature set different. Everything's different. So just a little warning on that one, that, wow, one little version can make a big difference. And those are the two that just really stand out. Another thing, too, and I will highlight this, and I'm guilty of this. You know, remember when they went in Windows 7, when they went to the new control panel thing? Yeah, we all said, you know, show me the old one, right? Because you're just used to the little familiar icons. Do you still do the same thing in Active Directory? You do the old Active Directory users computers? Right? Yeah, admit it. I do too. I still do. DSA.MSC. I just type that at the Windows menu, and boom, it's there. You got to know the new tool. Because guess what? It's new. That's what they're going to test you on. Okay? It's not even that new, right? But if you haven't been using that, get in there and see how it's different. Looking for the deltas. Creating and managing group policy. This is one that's been my saving grace. I've taken over 60 certification exams in my career of 18 years as an MCT. GPO questions, I generally get all those really, really well because I actually delivered a GPO session. When we get to that, I actually have my shared notes from the internal group policy session I did at Microsoft 3 years ago that was all for Server 2012. So anything that's new and different, I have all the latest resources and references for you, and I have an AK shortcut that will help you out. But again, group policies, a lot of people just do it, but they don't know the application rules, how they work, how they flow. So it's very, very important to understand that. God, I love I got more extra time. That's great. Does the fact that added up to more than 100%? Yeah, no, who's counting? The reason why they do that because they vary. It can vary depending on what area. And, you know, I was listening to, I always listen to other people's sessions, and someone, I don't know if I'm curious if anyone's heard this, or is David Elfasy still around me? He must have left. I heard a comment I've never ever heard before, so I don't know that this is true, but she said that if you just go in and just try to take a test, like you're just trying to see what's on it, and you're bombing it, it times out and shuts you out. Has anyone ever heard of that? Or I don't know if that's true or not, but that was very interesting. I guess they didn't want people just, from, exam cram sites going in and trying to. It makes sense. It makes logical sense they would do that, but I never heard that. So don't know if it's true or not. Just saying. All right. So the first section here, so we're going to talk about installing and configuring servers. And again, we just take this stuff for granted. You got a VM fired up. I got an Azure VM. Get the disk out and just play with it. And look at all the options. If I start with a full GUI, how do I get it down to server core? If I go server core, how do I get to what they call min shell? Right? So I get some of the admin tools, but it's not full GUI. So you want to go, that's what I did when I first studied this exam. I started with a server core. Okay, how do I get to min shell, the in between, and then how do I get to full GUI? So I had to learn all those commands. That's the best way to do it. And the other one, the first time I did this, I was actually in the Server 8 RDP team, the rapid deployment team at Microsoft. And the first time I did Windows Server 2012, actually it was called Server 8 at the time, I went next, 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 next. And you know what you get if you get that? Server core. I was like, oh, what do I do? So I learned quick and fast. But it's a good exercise to do that, right? So installing servers, so we're going to talk about planning, a little bit of planning, optimization, and also migration. So on the server exams, again, all the way back to NT4, we had this version before. Can you upgrade? Right, that's a typical type of question. So you need to know what format. Number one answer right here is we're only 64-bit platform, so if they say 32-bit, there's no upgrading it, right? So you get some of those things, they're not going to ask those questions explicitly, but they'll give you a scenario. So configuring servers, and yes, configuring server core is something I'm going to bet most of you are not familiar and comfortable with. Build a core, get the little DOS-like menu, and see what the options are. Actually, I have a screenshot, I think, in here of that. So look at what you can do or what you cannot do. What kind of services can I install and what services can I not install? Because the scenario we want to be a really secure lockdown box, and we want to do this. Can you? Okay, it's core. Can I install it? Yes or no? Right? It's a little decision tree you have to go through in your mind. Then we'll talk about configuring local storage. This is another one of those things, basic concepts we take for granted. Oh, yeah, I fire up disk, all dynamic disk, But when was the last time you did basic disk? And do you remember all the rules for basic disk and extended partitions? I know it because I taught it for 10 years. I don't have to blink an eye over it. But I think most people just click and they make the disk and they're done. Right? They don't think about the old rules. So we'll remind you of those things. Again, the old stuff you may not have known about or forgotten about, and the delta new things, that's what's important. Okay? You got to know the versions. right? So if I'm installing this, what options we have? No 32-bit. We have data center, standard, essentials, foundations. What is missing from that picture that we always had in 2008 R2? What version? Enterprise. Very good. No enterprise. There is no enterprise. Okay. There are some other ones. I don't think they're going to come up on the exam. This is what they'll pretty much focus on. But there's also Hyper-V version. There's storage and multi-point server 2012 also. But from an exam perspective, I think we're pretty good with these 4 options. Also, this is really interesting. Okay, I'll be honest. I forgot, and I had to dig this one up again. But it talks about pose instances and vos instances. And the clue is in the first initial. What do you think the difference is? Right. So physical versus virtual. So in the licensing, it actually stands for physical operating server environment and virtual server operating system environment. So what does it support? And again, you're given a scenario. We got blah, 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 blah. Can we do this with physical? Can we do it with virtual? Is it going to be supported? Unlimited. If you got data center, I remember when I heard that, I was like, really? Wow, that's amazing. Unlimited virtual server instance if you have data center. Standard, you can do 2. Foundation, you can't with virtual. And essentials, which is just kind of, it says the standard web version of 2008 is very similar. Okay. So know the differences in licensing exposed by the number of users and physical or virtual instances they support. This type of information, when I was doing the Azure talk, a lot of these things I kind of left alone and said, yeah, maybe important. Again, the core server type stuff, it really is, because what they're going to do is they're going to give you a scenario, they'll give you a bunch of information. We have an old server, it's got this much disk space, this much RAM. Can we do this? Right? So you need to know these basic numbers. And it's not a huge, massive chart, but probably what I would focus on, typically RAM, processor limit, 1, 2, and 64. That's not too tough to remember. And also, the thing I always highlight from an exam perspective also is the things that are delta. Like, for example, here I know these 2 are the same. Root only, CA only. But here on the standard data center, we can actually do full Active Directory services and full ADCS. So in other words, these become bottlenecks. Right? Those things become bottlenecks, where standard data center give you more. And that's really what I want to know. What's that delta of what do I gain by going to standard or data center? Yeah, just a little side note. I was explaining to my son the other day, there was between a desktop operating system and a server operating system. I got the core kernel is about the same, right? It's the services it offers and the throughputs, the inputs and outputs that are different, right? That's why we can scale massive websites. This is just a simple picture if you haven't done this, right? So I fire up the wizard for server 2012. You can choose server core installation, server with a GUI, standard. So I got standard, core, GUI, 2012 data center, core, GUI. Okay? And they give you a description here. So read this stuff, right? When you have help files. I do that all the time. If I'm in an interface and there's a little question mark thingy, click on it, read it. And a lot of times that's the same stuff that actually came out from the server 2012 documentation on TechNet. Right? So it's right there in front of you. I did that. I passed an entire IIS exam once just by doing that, looking at every property and looking at every help file, and that's how I learned it a long, long time ago. Okay? So that's why we put these pictures to read these things. And again, as I mentioned, if I would do this next, by default, you will get just what's selected right there, server core. Okay? The installation requirements, kind of a key thing you need to know. Minimum requirements, 1.4, 64-bit processor, no upgrade from 32, 512 megabyte of RAM. Would I want to use that? No, but could I? Yes. Test lab environment. Right? I spin up small environments all the time for tests. It doesn't take that much in a virtual world. Right? 32 gigabyte available space is the minimum. DVD, not a prerequisite. Super VGA, keyboard, mouse, internet access, all that kind of stuff. Processors, so we make a big change. So over here is the old school, 256 from server 2008 going up to 640, 2 versus 4 terabytes of RAM, 16 versus 64 cluster nodes. Okay, so lots of improvement there. How many people are still working on 2008 R2? Just curious. Okay, good. Give us some business. I like that. That's going to be our big business this year. It's coming up in July, right? 2003 end of life. Yep, lots of upgrades going to be going on. And if you're a vendor, that's a good opportunity, right? Knowing how to do 2003 upgrades, migrations. It's going to be big. Got to give you some real-world stuff there. Yeah. Features on demand, very, very cool things. So you can keep the server build simple and targeted. If you haven't seen this, so it's located in the Windows WinSXS, which stands for side-by-side installation. You can remove later if you need. So basically, we can actually keep this stuff kind of stored locally, so if I need to install it, it will do it much quicker. Now, the catch is, and I've learned this kind of the hard way being a customer deployments, because I don't normally do this myself, but a lot of customers do. So I've gone to install something, and then I'm trying to add a feature, and I didn't know the path, right? So they have it hidden somewhere. They may have moved it on a network share or something like that. So I have to be able to point to that, and then when I go to add that feature, there's actually an option that you can point to an alternate path. It says specify an alternate path during the installation, right? So, and then to do that, and this is one thing, if you're not doing this already, I'm highly allergic to code. But I'm really learning and the love PowerShell, finally, because of the integrated ISE, so I save all my scripts for everything. And everything I do now, everything, it's installed as Windows feature, uninstall. So once I have those all set, I just give it to my customers, say run this, boom, they're done. Okay. We'll come back to the Hyper-V, but the key thing to note here is it works on VHD and VHDX. So in 2012, we now have VHDX, newer format, as well as still supporting VHD. Just a little side trivia question. In Azure, just because I was just there in the last session, they actually use VHD, believe it or not. But you can upload VHDX and it will do a conversion for you. So it's kind of a cool thing. Can get my mouse in the right place. And there's an example using the source, so using the install Windows feature with the source command. And this exam is probably where they first started getting in the Server 2012 exams. So if you haven't loved and embraced PowerShell yet, you need to. So here's what I'll tell you. Almost everything that we're going to talk about or show you, if I don't have something, you should look up how to do it in PowerShell. And the easiest way to do that is to open up PowerShell_ISE, which is the integrated scripting environment. And then you just, once you install that, you click on the drop-down, say DNS, Active Directory, and it will show you all those options. Some will appear to be very obvious and simple, like, okay, I understand that. But the ones that you don't know and don't understand, that's what you want to focus on. But this is a good example because, everyone goes, oh, yeah, I know install Windows feature, but what if you got to point to your WIM file and to an alternate source location to install a feature? That's an example of that PowerShell script. All right, so this is a great picture. This is one of those pictures you want to know in your head, right? Have a visual shot. So this is the command PowerShell server configuration when I'm in core. So of the 19 roles that are available in Server 2012, only 12 are here. And you can see what you can do in the configuration. So I'm not going to read all that, but you should know that. So when they ask you what you can or cannot do. And also, in particular, it's not knowing what's available, it's knowing what's not available, which is more important in this case. So my bread and butter, like I said, ADFS, not there. Can't do federation. Fax application, network policy, remote desktop, volume activation, deployment services. Okay, so all those options are not available. But when you come back to these slides, and by the way, these slides will be available within 24 hours. Also, the link to my blog. I will post them as well in case you can't find them. So my blog is very easy, aka.ms/certification. Oh, no, this one's different. aka.ms/migrate, aka.ms/migrate/2008R2. And I know it's odd, but it's because I did a migration to 2012, and so I put a bunch of good stuff there. And there's an example also of the uninstall. In this case, so uninstall Windows feature, server GUI shell, and server GUI management infrastructure. So that will basically take you from a full-blown GUI interface all the way back down to a core server. And again, you really just got to do it and go back and forth and try them. Okay? So for those of you who've done some of this imaging stuff in the past, a lot of you may have done ImageX. Right? That's been pretty much deprecated. So now the deployment tool is DISM. And we just gave some examples, but this is one of those things you definitely want to look up on TechNet. I apologize, I do not have I think I may have a link on that on my blog, but I'll try to update that to get you some better links in there. So a couple good things. So we can do a DISM online, get features. And again, if you're running that, you got to make sure you have the admin. It didn't show up too good in the colors there. And you can also do enable features, and you specify the feature name, with a colon after it. So again, knowing the syntax, how that's structured out, these are important points when you take these exams. So again, not using this example, but, well, yeah. So if I do DISM, how is this structured differently from a PowerShell option? Right? So that's the kind of stuff you want to know on the exams. So once I've done, click, 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 next, 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 and got it done, then what do we do with the post-installation of the task? And this is stuff, hopefully, if you've been playing around this, you're doing now. But if you haven't been doing it in 2012, you need to know how it's different compared to 2008 R2. I go to 2008 R2 server now, I'm lost, because I've been doing this since it came out in beta. So, things like the network connection, time zone, remote desktop, and all this stuff is in the new server manager, and by default, this fires up. Now, here's another interesting thing from Exam Point, because they give you pictures sometimes. And they'll say, what's going on here? What do you look for? Well, if you haven't been here and you didn't know, I mean, obviously it's a warning sign, Will Rogers, something's going on. But usually, in most cases, when I see this, and I'll use my ADFS as an example. If I run the installed Windows feature and I say ADFS, that just puts the rule bits there. It's not configured yet. So if I go to fire up the ADFS management tool, the tool will be there, but it says you haven't configured it yet. That will pop up. If I do an install Windows feature for anything, it's likely going to need configuration afterwards. So that will show up in there. The new server manager also, you need to play around with if you haven't, is very powerful because it's not only this, but I can connect to multiple servers and make server groupings and mappings and do it all remotely. And I can do remote desktop from here. First time I saw that, I was like, whoa, I can finally get everything in one place without doing a custom MMC. It's really beautiful. And when you're on that local server, you see all your options. Am I in a work group? Am I in a domain? How do you do it? This is one of the first things that customers, when they go to 2012, how do I get rid of that IESC, right? The internet security, it's right here. So there's a little box, you can turn that on or off. So knowing what these options are, so again, have I been there, done that? Where do I get to all my management tools once I've installed and configured something? Well, it's going to be two places, either A in the tools drop down. So everything you do as install Windows feature will show up under tools. Also, and my favorite way is just hit the Windows key, and then it all appears right there. I just start typing DNS, and boom, it pops up. But they're really trying to finally get to a consolidated tool that I can get to everything there. All right, so this is a cool new feature, too. I personally haven't used this myself. I'm sure a lot of people. How many people have used this? It's curious. Show of hands. All right, good. You guys, this will be easy. Piece of cake here. So there's been third-party solutions and basically came out with this to try to make it more integrated. So basically, you can have two network cards, for performance and availability, work kind of in tandem together. So this is kind of a nice little graphic. It actually shows you kind of what it looks like. So if you actually create a NIC teaming, it shows up in network connections. But from an exam perspective, the things I want you to know here in particular are the different types of modes. So you have three different types of modes. You've got the switch independent for incoming traffic, and then you can do static teaming or LACP. Has anyone heard of LACP, those of you who have done it? What's it stand for? Very good. Link Aggregation Control Protocol. And you think about that, it kind of makes it sound like what it is, right? We want to bring all the bandwidth together, right? Aggregate it, right? So knowing acronyms and what they stand for, usually in exam, they're not going to give you just an acronym. That's usually, they spell it out, right? But knowing what that was and that goes with this feature set can help, does it answer this question or not, because it was a question not talking about NIC teaming, right? So once we have that, you can actually look at the properties, right? And we can select in here, okay, what are my member adapters? You select those. What's the state? And if I'm going to try this again here, see if this will work. Yeah, there we go. Kind of worked. So if you look at the teaming mode there, get really fancy here like Mark Rusinovich does. So you can do, what are the teaming modes I can do? Static teaming, switch independent, LACP. And then the next one gives you this right here. So load balancing modes. And again, this is stuff. Oh, that didn't work. Wrong one. Address hash versus Hyper-V port. Okay. So a little tip about when you get the slide, you won't see this stuff unless you go full screen, right? Because these are animations, so make sure you do that. Okay. And we also give you a PowerShell command because you're likely to see PowerShell commands in the option.
Will dynamic or anything like that be on that?
Well, what?
Is it switch independent dynamic? Isn't that, will that be on the
If it's R2, yeah, so it would be. Yeah, so we probably did that picture before.
Yeah, I was just
So
wondering.
very good point. Thank you. Yep. All right. So PowerShell commands, and again, in this case, they actually just did a get command dash module net lbfo. I'd go to PowerShell IC, and then I'd see it right there. It's easier. But just be familiar with what those do. But in particular, I think the one we have down here is probably a kind of a thing. I want to make a new team. What's the command net lbfo team? Give it a new team, and you specify what nicks go in there and set the parameters. The verb parameter, okay.
So it's like get command dash verb net lbfo.
Oh, yeah. So getting the verb from it, yeah, absolutely. So get command, then dash verb to find them all. Very good. And then the last picture here is just simply showing, so once you've done that, you actually see here, zoom in. So you see the nick teaming, and that's actually been enabled right there. Okay. All right, so Windows disk settings. So we're going to go a little old school here and test your knowledge. I think we got a few people who've been around in the past in this. So we have different, when you're making a disk, you have different partition styles, the classic master boot record or GUID, GPT, GUID partition table. So let me ask you this. So how many people remember this? So in the old school, when I had master boot record and I do like a basic disks, how many primary partitions can I do? 4. Okay. What if I need to break it up even more than that? What do I do? We had to do 3 and then 1 extended partition, right? And then when we went to dynamic disk, do we still have that option? No, that goes away. Right? That's the beauty. That's why they did dynamic disk. We don't have that limitation. So in the past, if I needed to break up my disk into 10 chunks, I had to do 3 primary partitions with extended partition, then break up the extended partition. Right? Dynamic disks, I can make up to 32, I think it is. So it makes it much easier. So when we divide our disk into partitions, what are our options? Kind of typical options. This is stuff right out of the box that we can do. And it's been around for quite a while. So you have simple disks, spanned, striped, mirrored, RAID 5. And hopefully you've been around enough to know the difference, but understand the basics. Why would I choose striped versus mirrored versus RAID 5? A lot of people use RAID 5 because you get both redundance and you get high speed, right? But in RAID 5, there's actually a cost to it, right? Because if you're doing RAID 5, it takes longer to do the writes, right? Because it has to configure the different information that's spanned across. But reads are actually faster with the RAID 5. So just understand the different ways we can slice and dice that. And then formatting, we have our 3 choices, NTFS, FAT32, and FAT16. Okay. All right, working with disks, so we have the VHD original format, and we got the new format, the VHDX, which goes up to 64 terabytes. And when you do that, so if I'm making a new VM inside of Hyper-V, it gives you the option to select that. In this case, you see right up here. So it says, what format do you want to use, the VHD or VHDX, right? And if we have VHD, you're limited to 2040 gigabyte in size. So that's one of the good things about it is taking these snapshots of the pictures. You kind of see what the default settings are and configuration options. And again, that's going to help you out to know those when you're given a scenario and it says, can we do this? Well, I'm limited to 2040 gigabyte on the VHD. I therefore need to go VHDX. Server managed usage, so you have a cool feature. You can do the storage pools, and just like you see here in the picture, right? So it's basically you're creating a pool of physical disks. So I can kind of aggregate multiple disks and then control and manage them as if there were one. Okay? So you make sure that's one of those things that's really good to do in a virtual world for practice. All right. So for in each section, what we try to do here is give you some just basic key tips. And again, simple little tips that might make a difference in a question or not. So in installation and configuration of the server operation, it's 64-bit only. Hopefully you know that. But that tells you I can't upgrade from a 32-bit, right? Know the versions, additions, and the differences. And like we showed before, so which ones have unlimited, like data center in a virtual machine, versus if I'm standard, what are the limits? What are the memory capacity limits and things like that? What's not in core? And if I'm in core, what things can I do from that management tool? Right? So that's a very typical thing. I mean, it's been a long time since I did this exam, but I remember something like that. You know, they said, can you do this? And I had to think in my head what was on that picture, right? And again, the best way to do it is to install core, fire up those admin tools, and look at it. Disk partitions, types, limits with those, NIC teaming, what we can do. And also, again, I would highly recommend to look up the switches for DISM and what you can do in that. Okay. All right, so we put a couple practice questions, tried to make them kind of pseudo-like, you know, they might possibly phrase them. And again, we can never do a question exactly like it because that would be wrong and bad. You have a server named Core1 that runs a core installation of a Server 2012 R2 Standard Edition. You need to configure Core1 to run a core installation of Server 2012 R2 Data Center Edition. So you're going from Standard to Data Center. You must achieve this goal, and I love this phrase, they do this all the time, with the least amount of administrative effort, right? You don't want to do too much, just enough to make this happen. So what options should we do? A, use Server Manager CMD, which that actually is a real thing. You can do Server Manager from the command prompt. Do you want to do an offline servicing using DISM? Do you want to do an online servicing using DISM? Or do you want to install Windows Server 2012 R2 and click next, 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 next on set up that exe? I'm hearing C. Is that your final answer? I think that's a good answer. You're right. C is the correct answer. And you need to put the key in. Yes, that helps. The little things that matter, right? Okay, and some of these questions, not all of them, but we have the reference for where that specific is. So again, if you weren't sure why, you can go back and dig down that a little bit more. All right, the next section, configuring server roles and features, configuring file and share access. And again, this is where I'm going to go old school. What were the permissions on shares versus, you know, NTFS permissions, how they combine, stuff I used to teach day in, day out. A lot of people just don't think about it because you don't have to, really. Configuring print and document services. And this one, really, it's the same as it's been for a long time, but what gets people, if you haven't taken a previous older exam, are the terms they use and knowing what very subtle differences, and we'll explain those to you as well in print and document services. And then finally, configuring service for remote management. We already talked about one of those things that we can do, which is really cool. But as in the new server manager, we can do all our remote management from that one tool and interface. But you also have other things like remote management, WinRM, and what sorts of things can we do on the server core versus, you know, VMs, doing firewalls, all sorts of things. Managing domain joined servers or non-domain joined servers. Okay. So good old file shares and NTFS permissions. Right, so some of the stuff's pretty basic, but you know, if we have a file share that's network only, it's the first line of defense. The basic permissions, if you forgot, read, change, full control. Folders only, drive. Oh, yes, you can only put the file shares on the folder. You can't. What does the drive? Can you share out a drive? Yeah, how, in the green there. How do you share a drive? The administrative shares. Right, share it as a dollar. By default, if you're an admin, right, you get them all, right? $C$, the $D$, that sort of stuff. But I could actually mount a drive within a drive. So I could actually take a drive, put an empty folder, and mount that as a drive and actually share that out separately. It's another way you can do that too. So probably, I'd say from exam perspective of putting these things together, this bullet right here with effective permissions is probably one, this will usually almost every time get you something, you know, a related type question. So we have these sets of permissions in our share, and we have these sets of permissions in our NTFS. What does Dustin get, right? He's a member of these groups, right? So how do they work? Well, if I'm a member of multiple groups, they all combine. So if you have read on one, write in another, and full control, you get full control, right? That's easy, right? But what if I combine share and NTFS? What's the rule of thumb? The most restrictive, right? It's going to lock it down. So if we have a share that's wide open and you want to lock it down, then you put more restrictive on the NTFS, right? Okay. And then one thing that changed, so that's kind of new compared to the past, I think this changed in 22, maybe it was 2008 or 2, I forget. But there's explicit and implicit denying. Okay, y'all understand the difference? Explicit versus implicit denying. So if I have my little checkbox with permissions, if I do not select something, that is implicit denying. In other words, I don't give Raymond, I give him read, but I don't give him write. So I've implicitly denied you with right? But if I click the deny, and you remember, so this is the important thing. Deny always wins. Deny is the trump card. If you play cards, it's the trump card. Trump cards always win, right? So if Raymond is a member of one group, has full control, another one that's got read, and I make him a member of a third group, and I click the deny checkbox, he's out, right? Explicit deny always wins, right? And when we combine share and NTFS permissions, they come together. Okay? So knowing that combine rule, the explicit deny, those are basic concepts. And again, they're not going to ask that question explicitly. They'll say, I have this, this, and this. I have this, this, this. I'm a member. They'll show you the groups. I'm a member of these three groups. And they'll show you the little window, right? And you have to put this all together in your head, how that works. My favorite feature, which I was so happy to see, most people don't know about this and never use it. How many of you use ABE, access-based enumeration? All right, okay, keep the hand up. And confess, how many of you actually did Novell? Go ahead, admit it. Anyway, yeah. So if you came from the Novell world, right, this was kind of familiar. Because in the old network, I admit it, I was a CNE 5.0. So back in the old Novell day, if you didn't have rights to something, you couldn't see it. You couldn't browse it, right? In Windows environment, click in the network neighborhood. I can see everything. I may not get in, but I can see it. Access-based enumeration is that's one of the greatest little features to tell a customer about. Like, oh, wow. Really? I can block them from seeing that? Yeah. And you now get it in the wizard. It didn't used to be in the wizard before. So now when I set this up and I mount a directory, it tells you, access-based enumeration displays only the files and folders a user has permission to access. If they don't have read or equivalent, it hides it. It cannot see it. It's not there. Very, very cool feature. Yeah, it came out a long time ago. But most people never knew about it, right? Yeah, 2003, I think, is when it came out, I believe. Because I was preaching it back then. You know, it's like, come on, it's good stuff. Okay, so additional file share features, things like configuring offline files, disk quotas, and this is kind of the simple, if I'm on a volume on my C drive, configuring shadow copies, which is a great little feature if you've never used that before, right? So if you have that on, shared drive and someone deletes something and you've had your shadow copies on a scheduled basis or you create one now, it will, if I delete something and we had a shadow copy done yesterday, I can revert back to the last copy version of that, right? And again, that's been around for a while too, so that's a great feature. Okay. Brand new in 2012, right? 2012 and 2012 R2. So this is just kind of a hierarchical. I got a little more specifics on here, but the work folders infrastructure. So, you have the basic ideas. You have, you've heard from Satya, right? It's all about, mobile and cloud first, right? That's the big mantra. So you have all these mobile devices, and now they need to access folders internally securely. So we have a device management policy. We have file encryption. You do selective wipe. You can limit access to registered devices using ADFS for federation, right? And then all connects to the file server. And then you do authentication on the back end with Kerberos, Digest, or ADFS using the OAuth protocol. And from that, you can manage access to quotas, use file screens, reportings, classification, and even RMS protection to rights protect your data. So some key things to note. You basically know, first of all, it exists, what it is, what it does, right? And then some basic key points here. So the file and storage services subrole, so it's actually a subrole. Work folders is a subrole of file and storage services. It creates an additional access protocol. And you can also do multiple syncing shares. So you can sync these shares per server. And then finally, the files actually stay in sync across all devices, and they require SMB clients to continue to work with that. Okay. All right. Configuring print document servers. Again, pretty fundamental stuff, but if you haven't played with it in a while, it's good stuff to know. Very simple concept. You haven't heard this spiel before. We've talked about it in 2008, 2003, NT40, is that a printer and a print device are two different things. You all heard this one, right? The printer is the software interface, not the printer itself. The print device is the thing the paper comes out of. So whenever they talk about that from an exam perspective, the printer is like when you go in the printer and you look at the software interface, the properties, that's the software. Print device is the thing the paper comes out. And again, it's just a concept to understand how they address that in there. So from a Windows printing perspective, understanding device management, here you see they're adding it as a role in here for print document services. You can migrate printers once you're in the interface. Direct versus network printing. You can manage share printers out. Know the printer permissions. Right? So we have three. I got to think about this one for a second. Help me out. Three permissions. So you have print. We have manage printers and full control. I got it right. Yeah. I haven't looked at it in a long time myself. So manage printers is really good. So the joke I used to say is, that secretary at the front desk who plays a little too much solitaire, right? Every time someone complains that the documents get jammed, give that person the managed printers, and she can take care of that jam for you, right? Delegate that role and responsibility out. So you can tell them I said that. You can deploy printers through a GPO, which is always cool and groovy. And you can also consider remote desktop easy print as an option. So again, if you haven't done this in a while, get in there, play with the options, go into properties, see what you can configure, what you can't configure. Okay, look at the permissions. Question?
I was going to say also, I noticed that printing is no longer available in failover clustering in R2.
Printing is no longer available in failover clustering in R2.
Cannot make a failover clustering print.
Very good. I didn't know that. Thanks. Good tip. Appreciate it. Always learn something from the audience. All right, so some key tips to remember from this section. Again, just hitting a couple highlights here. Remember that volume shadow service applies to the entire volume. It's not a per folder, it's entire volume. Understand the difference between basic and advanced permissions. So if you right-click on a file or folder, you have your basic permissions, but when you click advanced, that's when you get really granular and you have a lot more options. And not that you need to know the advanced permissions, but just know that there are differences between the basic permissions, I think, and the file share permissions. Remote management strongly encouraged, which anyone should be doing anyways. You should never be logged on locally. And with the server manager, it's really fantastic now because it's much easier to do that. Because I can actually, and here's another thing too, so I can take the server manager just like we have in the past. I can add the feature on my Windows 8 desktop for RSAT, the Remote Server Administration Tools. And I will get Server Manager on my Windows 8 machine if I'm logged in the domain. Or no, I don't. Right? I log in as a user. And then I can do a run as and run that as a domain administrator. And from my laptop, I can use Server Administrator, add in all the servers to my environment, and securely run that in its own administrative window by doing the run as on that. Okay. There was one customer we dealt with a long time ago. It was actually before Microsoft. But if they got caught not doing run as, it was a pink slip. It was that much of a security risk. Okay. All right. This one, the colors get kind of funky, but we do have the answer for you. So practice question on this one. We're doing it in time. Bless you. You create a volume on disk 1 on the server and create a shared folder on that volume. You want to enable the volume shadow copy service on the shared folder. What step can you take to accomplish that task? So there's something we just said about volume shadow service that's wrong with this question. Where do we apply volume shadow service? On the volume, right? Yeah. So the first one is on the shared folder is wrong, right? And that's a good point too. Knowing what's wrong. And I can say this in this class but session because there's practice exams out there. And if y'all don't know that, in my opinion, the best ones are Measure Up and Self-Test Software. I think Transcenders are still out there too, right? They've been kind of traditional. I probably shouldn't say this, but like when I get ready for exam and I do those, you know what I do? I click End right away. And I go and read the answers why they're wrong. And they usually have hyperlinks to them. Because that's how I learn, though. I learn by studying and reading. And then I go to the interface. And then when I go to the interface, I see what I read about, and then it makes that connection. But I don't want to waste your trying to figure out. Just give me the stuff and go for it, just like I'm giving you the stuff right here. So, but these do exist out there already for those practice exams. And a lot of great links and resources. Yeah, so the answer is B, the color. Something happened funny there. All right, configuring Hyper-V, as I said in the beginning of the presentation. Check the time. Oh, perfect. Right, halfway done, halfway the slides. Configuring Hyper-V, you just got to install it. Do it on your Windows 8 laptop if you don't have access to seeing a server. And look at all the options. It's pretty much, I can't say this for absolutely certain, but I think it's 99% the same. Very few things that are different. So you need to know how to basically configure the virtual machines, the storage, as well as the virtual networks. Okay. So my son found this out really hard when he tried to install Hyper-V on his laptop and configure. It wouldn't run, right? Because there's certain hardware requirements you have to have. So these are terms you may or may not know, but from an exam perspective, you need to see these and know these. So it has to have hardware-assisted virtualization, and you're usually going to see this in your BIOS setting. You turn it on. So and they give two examples, which are kind of what they will cite and use as a scenario for the exam: the Intel VT, the Intel virtualization, or AMD virtualization technology. Okay, so it has to be enabled, and usually, I mean, I think if you agree with that, but usually it's not turned on by default, right? So if you go to set this on, you have to turn on. And when my son got a new laptop, that was the first thing we did. You also have DEP. You should be familiar with this term. Hardware enforced data execution prevention. Intel describes as executed disabled, and AMD describes as no execute. It's a technology using CPUs to segregate areas of memory for use by their storage processor. Specifically, you must enable the Intel XD bit execute disable, or the AMD NX bit no execute bit. And that's one of those ones that just, my mind doesn't really sink in really solid, but, review that slide a couple times, and that's a good potential type, scenario that you may be able to apply toward a question as far as core requirements. Okay? And in this slide here, we're really just looking at the basic features. So things like typical features like dynamic memory. You got to love that if you're doing it on your laptop, right? So it will use what it needs, and then if it doesn't, you can say, give me 8 gig of RAM and make it dynamic, and then it will swell back down if it only needs 2. I do that all the time when I run Hyper-Vs on my laptop. You can add processors, you can add drives, you can add different controllers. Now here is where it's going to get you in the exam. Not that can I do these, but can I do it while it's running? This is the exams on R2. Yes. I think you could do some of that was, I think they may have enhanced some of it in R2. Some things. So this is the stuff you got, and I didn't spell it all out, so I'm going to give you a little homework on this one. So what you want to do is on your Hyper-V, have 2 VMs or have one on and one off, and look at what you can change. Because I was like, the first time I saw I could add a network card if I haven't selected, while it was running, I was like, wow, I don't have to shut it down to add a network card? That's pretty cool. But can you change the RAM? Right? No, right. Yeah, what was that?
Direction for a dynamic can, but only in one direction.
Right, right. So those are all excellent points. Can I go one direction or the other? Can I flip something on or off? So this is a classic example. I think if you do it and you see it, it's going to stick versus me, just spitting it out or you reading it. So look at those things you can change. The minimum, maximum RAM, the buffer, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Does the exam particularly care about whether or not it's in a cluster or not?
Not
a different set of what you can change if it's running.
Yeah, I don't think so. Could be wrong, but I don't generally think so. It's usually that type of scenario. If it's running or not running, what can I change or not, but not specifically cluster. I don't think so. I think you're pretty safe there. Yes, very good point. So he said the architecture of the virtual disk, whether I do VHD or VHDX. Excellent point. Thank you for that reminder. So make one of each, right? When you make your VMs, right? Fire them up. And of course, if you're not already playing this, living, breathing all the time, I do with this just like Azure does, right? I do a sysprep read-only general OS disk. And there's actually a TechNet blog out there how to do that. So then, whenever I needed a server or an operating system, it's like 2 minutes and I have my VM ready. And that's exactly how Azure works when you're spinning up in the portal. Newer features, too. So when it comes to, Server 2012 and R2, what things can we do? Integration features that are built in for operating system shutdown, time sync. You have a heartbeat. Why we have heartbeats? What? Right. So they're talking to each other. Now, this one's interesting. I apologize. I didn't catch this. So what's wrong with this last bullet? It says backup volume snapshot. What's wrong with that? Checkpoint. It's no longer called snapshot. It's called checkpoint. Good catch. Okay, it's called a checkpoint. Okay. So some key numbers, again, from a design perspective or a specification or a scenario they give you. 2048 virtual CPUs. Wow. Up to 4 terabytes of physical memory. One server can host 10 24 active VMs. Each VM up to 64 virtual CPUs. Not on my laptop. Up to 1 terabyte of memory and clusters. Supports clusters with up to 64 nodes and 8,000 VMs. Big, big numbers. Okay, a little practice question for you. See how I'm doing good time here. Server 1 runs Windows Server 2012 R2 with a Hyper-V rule installed. Server 1 runs many VMs. A virtual machine named VM1 is configured to use dynamic memory. You are asked to increase the startup RAM allocation on VM1, and your solution must cause the least amount of disruption to the users. What do you do? Do we shut down the VM, change it, and then start it back up? Do we stop Hyper-V service on server 1, change the startup RAM on VM1, and start the Hyper-V service back up? Or while the VM is running, change the maximum RAM on VM1? And we already said that. That's one that we can change, right, while it's running. Okay. Oh, no, I got it wrong. I'm sorry. Trick me. I had that in my brain. You have to shut down the VM1, then change. That's one you can't change, right? Yeah, startup RAM is the one you can't do. Right. Very good. Yeah, so now I apologize. That's when you have to shut down the VM RAM. Yep. Okay. Yeah, that came from Measure Up. So. Click. Okay. Next section. Configuring core networking services. So IPv4 and IPv6. A lot of IPv6, maybe a little, not a lot, but if you're not familiar with it, I do not have many links on here, but that's something, if you're not familiar with it and the type of addressing, you should probably look on TechNet. How it's constructed with the semicolon usage, right? If you have nothing in between the semicolons, they condense down. So it's actually possible in some cases you can actually have an IPv6 address look smaller than an IPv4, right? Because if there's nothing in between everything, you just have multiple series of colons, right? It's called I forget the shortened, there's a name for that notation, but you can make it shorter in IPv6. Deploying configure DHCP service. So there actually is, let's see a little trivia. How many of you have been studying or know this from Server 2012? What's the big new feature in DHCP? Failover. Yeah, so make sure you know that. And boy, when I did that migration project, I thought I knew it until I went to do it. And I found, there are some limitations there too as well. So, because I think, have you done it? Yeah. So tell me if this is what I'm recalling. So I think that we had server 1, server 2, server 3, and we wanted, I think when the failover, you can only do it 1-to-1, right? Yeah, we were trying to do 1-to-many or... It got really nasty. Yeah, so 1-to-1 works easy. You start spanning out even more, it gets a little tricky. So that was the first time I actually did it. Right, yeah. So it's one to play around with if you've got the VMs, but that's the big new feature you'll want to look into. Deploying and configure DNS service, pretty much the standard type stuff applies in there. It might be a couple little tips we have here for you. Okay. So important factors to know about addressing, IPv4 subnetting and supernetting. So what's the difference? Most of us probably know subnetting. Head nod, Ukrainian head bob, yeah. Subnetting, we know, yes. What about supernetting? What's supernetting? What is it? Subnetting subnet, right? So if you think about it, what does subnetting do? Right? You start borrowing bits to get different little allocations of hosts. So supernetting is the opposite. You're sliding the scale the other way to get more networks, right? Because when you take those 32 bits, right? So if we start on the left and go right, it will actually the address goes left to right, but the left-hand side is the network ID, the right-hand side is the host ID, right? So as I slide the scale this way, I get more network IDs. But if I start pairing off of a fixed address going this way, I'm subnetting. But if I slide the scale this way to collapse and combine networks, that's supernetting, right? Conceptually speaking, that's the difference. I will give you my little two-finger exercise. that I actually did for the Azure, because this will apply as well. Here's a typical type scenario question for subnetting. I've seen it ever since NT4 and even on the Azure exams. So the scenario is something like this. We want to make some new networks, and each network needs to have 50 hosts in it. What's the optimal IP address allocation? And they'll give you a bunch of networks with a CIDR notation /this/this. And you should know this now because you just sat here, right? So here's how it works. Right? A lot of people write out these 8 bits and 128, 192. So you don't need to do that. So here's how it works. It's always in that scenario. We got this many hosts. Which CIDR notation /whatever works best? So here's how it works. 50. So here's how you do it. In the exam, you hold up your hand, and each finger is a multiple of 2. 2 times 2 is 4. No. 8. No. 16. 32. 64. 64 will cover my 50, right, and not waste a bunch more. So I need to borrow 6 host bits. So if I have 255, 255, 255, 255, which is 8 ones, 8 ones, 8 ones, 8 ones, and I take away 6 bits, that leaves me with 255, 255, 255. 8 minus 6 is 2 bits. That's a 192. Or a /26. Yeah, I don't even need to figure out. I usually don't need to convert. It's usually CIDR notation, right? So if I knew I took away 6 bits, what's 6 minus 32? That's what I got left over. So if you didn't catch that, listen to the recording again. Okay? I taught my 7-year-old how to do subnetting that way. You got it now? I didn't hear it twice. I have a geeky son. At 4 years old, he asked me what came after a trillion, and I had to look at all these things. We went up to septillion, octillion, nonillion, decillion, and decillion, duodecillion, and we learned all these things. He wanted to know, and he never forgot. So some basic things there that will buy you one, hopefully, if you get that type of question. If you've never done a route print, I should have done a screenshot. I owe you on that. But what do I see in the options when I do a route print for the addressing? Right? Tunneling. So know the differences between the different tunneling options that are come up. And I think from an exam perspective, what you need to know is not how to configure these and what are the options and setting. It's more that A, these are tunneling options, and B, when would I choose one versus another? So that's a homework for you to look those up and to differentiate between those, because there are a couple scenarios where one option may work better than the other one. Okay. Here's another cool thing that they've been doing on the exams lately too, because in particular, and I think this may have come out in 2008, but if you're in DHCP, they have these little colored icons, and sometimes in exam they'll show you those pictures, right? You have to kind of know and understand what they are. So a green check mark, I don't have to put that in memory. That makes sense, right? It's all good and happy. Red's something bad, but what's the yellow, right? What's the yellow versus the blue exclamation? Super scope or super scope. What's a super scope? Super scopes where we take multiple scopes and combine them to administratively act as one, right? And you can set your DNS options, right, for all the scopes within a super scope, right? So yeah, take a look at that. I'm not going to read them all, but those are good possible things. This is one I thought was interesting too. So the yellow exclamation here on the scope or super scope, when you get the exclamation, 90% of your super scope or your leases have been used, is what that should say. Okay. DNS, so some basic terms. It goes without saying, believe it or not, and again, this should be a no-brainer, but if you don't do DNS, you might not. But what are the different types of records, right? When do I use an A record versus a quad A? What's quad A for? IPv6, right? MX? SOA? Start of authority, right? So all those things, CNAME, pointer record. When do I use those? When I'm thinking about replication, do I want Active Directory integrated? The answer is usually yes, right? Because it takes care of that for you, right? Versus doing primary and secondary. Right? So know the difference. So we have primary, secondary, Active Directory integrated, and stub zones. Anyone use stub zones? Man in blue, what do you use stub zones for? Right, so to answer requests in a zone you were not authoritative to. So it's kind of like a pointer. Yep, exactly. And you see the options on there too. And here's one, I don't think for this exam, but I will warn you by the time you get to 412, because there's some bleed over. So in this exam, it's going to be more of the simple stuff. But when you get to 412, that little bugger will come up, the DNS sec. So the DNS security option. So I don't teach that, I haven't done that, I can't even talk to it, but I'm just telling you, you might want to know about that one. That will pop up every once in a while, something about it. So if you're not familiar with it, look it up. Okay. So some key tips to remember here. Understand the importance of root hints. What do root hints do? Think of the root DNS servers in the world. Yeah, explain to people how DNS work. I'm like, there's a bunch of root servers out there, right? And they point to the COM servers. The COM servers point to your servers, right? And then they get to your server, and then it goes in. Know your subnetting. 2 times 2 is 4, 8, 16, 32. IPsec, global unique, or local address. So see how those are mapped. There's a bunch of stuff in TechNet about that. PowerShell is not the only way to do DNS. How else can I do DNS? I heard it? DNS command, right? That's an option. What else can I use for a DHCP? NetSH, very good. Who did that? You? No. That's a good one. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that or do that much. You can configure a lot of IP out configurations, right, in NetSH, NetShell. Very good stuff. Global names can be used. What are global names used for? It kind of replaced an old service that I used to say is set and forget it, and it just did its job for name resolution before we had DNS. It's kind of like WINS, right? It's a single label name you can do, kind of that kind of stuff. Be able to distinguish between stub zones, forward and reverse lookup zones. Okay, so forward lookup zones is what we typically use. Reverse lookup zone, it's going to do the opposite, right? Instead of taking a name and resolving the IP, it's going to take an IP and verify that the name is correct, right? So some things we'll use that as a check to look up. Sample question. You are the system administrator for a medium-sized Active Directory. Currently, the environment supports many different servers, some of which are running Windows 2003 and Server 2012. Server 1 is a domain join server running Server 2012 R2 with the DNS server role installed. Users that have computers joined to the same domain are reporting they are not able to resolve any server names. After troubleshooting this issue, you find that the DNS IP address used by the clients is different from the IP address of server 1. And you just don't want this to happen again, because that's messy. So what do? A, configure a static IP address in server 1. B, create a pointer record, DNS record for server 1. C, configure static IP addresses on client computers. Or D, configure the correct DNS IP in the DHCP scope options. Some of them are just silly answers, aren't they? You are absolutely right. And that's kind of another little subtle thing, too. And I don't think that they get into a lot of the weird extraneous options. But if you don't know what's available in scope options, you should be familiar. But a lot of the basic things you can point to, like I got my default gateway, got my DNS server. And also, here's another thing I didn't link about, but you actually will see this. I'm trying to remember which one it is. I think it's on the advanced DNS properties about how DNS and DHCP work together, right? So you'll see some of those options in the advanced properties. And again, that's one of the best ways to do it. Again, folks, even though you accept and live and breathe DNS, look at all the server properties, all the scope properties, right-click, what can I make new? Those are the things that are going to give you the intelligence to answer the questions about basic scenarios. All right, my meat and potatoes. I'm an AD kind of guy. I have been for a long time. So install, administer Active Directory. So getting domain controllers up there. And in there, so it's, we add, remove, getting the directory services. What do we do in a core install? You need to know that. From an exam perspective, probably the new one that most of you haven't had as much experience with is the IFM, install for media option. So you want to make sure you know and understand about that. Resolve DNS SRV record issues is something that's important. Configuring global catalog servers. I think most people are probably pretty savvy about GCs, particularly if you've ever been involved in Exchange, right? Create and manage Active Directory users' computers. And again, as I said at the very beginning, not with the old tool, right? Get to know and love the new tool. Break your habits right now and say, I will work in the new tool, the Active Directory Administrative Console. Creating and managing Active Directory groups and OUs. So this is one of the things I preached for a long time, and it's really basic and fundamental, but let me see if you can answer this, see how good you are. OUs only have 2 reasons and 2 reasons only for living. What are they? Group policies, 1. Delegation, very good. That's the only reasons for OUs. Group policy and delegation. Not for organizing your folders and files. Like most people, I mean, it kind of makes sense. I get it, right? But really, if I'm going to take an organization and break it down hierarchically like that, this should have some purpose. Like I'm actually going to delegate those responsibilities to someone, right? Just being lazy, I can use metadata and tags and all kind of stuff, right? So, just my pet peeve. So installing and administering Active Directory, and boy, I'll tell you this right now. When I interview people at Microsoft, this is like when they go, I go, what's your specialty? They go, AD. I'm like, oh, good, I'm going to ask you this question. Tell me your FSMO roles, right? What's a FSMO? Right, that's something you deal with all the time, right? So name the FSMO roles. What are they? Infrastructure Master, I heard? RID? PDC Emulator? Schema Master? I don't think I heard domain naming master, right? Okay, so just knowing what those are and what they do. Where do I go to configure them? Can I get them all in one place? Can I get most of them in one place? Where do I get 3 of them? Active Directory uses computers on the property. I get the other one on Active Directory sites and services. And where do you get the schema one? That was nasty. You actually have to install the schema management DL. I would look that one up. That one comes up every once in a while. So you have to register the SCHMGMT32 DLL, if I remember right, right? And then that allows you to then add it in the MMC, and then even then you have to do like another step. That's a good one to look up because most people never do that.
They talk about like how if you have redundant ones, the main controllers that you should only have certain roles and certain ones, or is it all based like?
So, yeah, and traditionally there's been classic recommendation. You put the 3 and then separate the infrastructure. I think the general exam perspective is if you're a single domain, all can go in one. Microsoft, we pretty much say they can all go in one now, but that's a good one. I'm not sure how to advise you. I think they still go with it. Was it the infrastructure master? Shouldn't be on the GC. Yeah. What was it? If everything's a GC, then you can do it all right. Yeah, so that's one worth digging up. Very important. ADDS is different from ADLDS. And if you're really old school, ADLDS equals Atom, right? So that used to be called Atom. Now it's ADLDS, which actually has been a while. The pictures show a lot of the things that you can do. So you actually have 2 different modules for Active Directory once you install it. You have common AD Active Directory, but you also have separate modules for ADDS deployment. So again, I would be familiar with these from an exam perspective because this is brand spanking new. I can do domain controller, forest. I can do test DCs. I can test domain installation, test forest installation. And this is great stuff for your customers too, right? So my customers are like, I want to validate what you just did. So I can do this, uninstall. So take a look at those options in there. Also, if you didn't know this, DC promo is kind of gone, but not really gone. But in other words, I don't promote anymore using DC promo. Does it work in the background? Yes, but it has different features and functions, right? But from an exam perspective, when I want to promote my domain controller, I do not select DC promo, right? So what I do is I install the Active Directory domain service. Then I'll get that yellow prompt in Server Manager, and it says, would you like to now configure promoting your domain? You walk through that, and it will give you all the options. But you can also script all that, too, with PowerShell. And that would be one worth noting, seeing how it does, right? Because that's kind of a typical thing we'd like to have scripted and well done. DC cloning is so cool. It's acceptable now because the whole thing they've done with the bits underneath it. You can do it now, where in the past it wasn't so happy to work. It is still possible. This last one's kind of important, even though we say we don't do DC promo, but it is still possible to automate using DC promo with an answer file, but there's specific. I would just know that you can do that from an exam perspective, but normally you do not do DC promo to promote your domain controller. Okay. So the Active Directory Administration Center, you do a lot of automation. Again, this is a future tip for those of you going forward in there, but when you get to 412, you're going to hit this stuff a lot. So the dynamic access control That's a type of topic they'll hit there, so you don't need to do that so much for here. But additional features we get, the recycle bin, the fine-grained passwords, LDIF-DE, CSV-DE, DSAD, they all still work. So here's a typical type exam type question. What's the difference between CSV-DE and LDIF-DE? Which one has more power? Let me rephrase it. Which one can I modify and not just add or delete? Between CSV-DE and LDIF-DE. LDIF-DE, right. So CSV-DE is pretty much add and remove. LDIF I can modify. So like, for example, I have a client, they want to find all the missing employee attributes, so we're actually going to do a PowerShell script to pull those up. And if we want to modify them, we can actually make an Excel spreadsheet, dump it as an LDIF file, and then update all those attributes for the employee ID using LDIF-DE. It's a pretty simple solution. Well, not simple, but not bad. Let's see what else we got here. So there's the old school, right? Going managing Active Directory users and groups in DSA.MSC. Little trivia, that originally was called Directory Service Administrator. That's why the shortcut's DSA.MSC. You can create groups in the Active Directory Administrative Center, and it looks a little bit different. So there's your picture of what it looks like. So a lot of the same type of stuff, but just you fill it in a little bit different. You put the group name, the SAM account name. Make sure you know, again, classic stuff. We have 2 group types, security and distribution. We have 3 scopes, domain local, global, and universal. Now this one I didn't put in a slide, but here's another classic exam question. It always buys me 1 or 2. You're shaking your head like you know where I'm going with this. AGGUDLP. Anyone ever heard that one? If you've ever taken a Microsoft course, we used to preach it. AGGUDLP. You add users, AG, into global groups. You can nest global groups into global groups. They can then be put into a universal group, which can then be put into a domain local group for the resource for the thing you're trying to get to, right? And then you apply permissions. AGGUDLP. That's the order of how you apply users to groups, nest groups, put them into universal groups to go across forest, and then you apply the permissions to the domain local group for the thing you're trying to access. Okay? And again, we talked about OUs for decentralized administration because we can delegate. If you've never done that before, go into OQ, right-click, delegate, look at the options. And in particular, from an exam perspective, because they talk about administering basic AD. What sort of things? Here's kind of a generic type question. I have a help desk support. What things can I delegate to them? Reset, yeah, a lot of great help desk stuff, right? Yes, so all that stuff. If you don't know those, get in there, see it, so you know. That's a very typical type scenario they're going to ask about. Okay? Oh, here, pick up a little bit. Currently, all domain controllers running 2008 R2. You install a 2012 server. You need to promote the server 2012 to a domain controller. You need to use the IFM, and we didn't talk about, but we're going to tell you what to do. So what should you do? Create a system state backup from any server 2008 R2. Upgrade one of the existing 2008 to server 2012 first, then create an IFM backup. So, was IFM available before? No, so that sounds like a pretty good option, right? Create an IFM backup for existing 2008. So the answer is B. I didn't have a highlighted thing, but it was B. You have to upgrade first to get that option, right? Okay, got a couple minutes. They give me extra time and I still run out. Create and manage group policy objects. So group policy object, there's really not one thing, it's 2 things, right? It has a group policy container, GPC, and a group policy template, which are the settings. That's the way it's always been. That's what they're for. You can configure things. What tool do I use to manage group policies? GPMC, which has been around for a long time, right? You used to be able to add it in. This, folks, right here, if you want to write this down, I made this AKA. So I did an entire presentation, internal at Microsoft, on group policy, what's new with 2012. I did it when 2012 first came out. So it's basically a survival guide. At the bottom of that link, there's a PDF survival guide with everything you want to know about group policy. aka.ms/group policy guide. Okay? Promise you, that's going to get you all the deltas that you want for group policy. Oh, sorry, I'll go back there. A couple more pictures. There you go. Because I actually did a search when I was doing it. There was an old group policy guide, but it was like done in 2000. I'm like, this needs to be refreshed. And the funny thing was that was the biggest session I ever did internally. Like, everyone wanted to know about group policy because they forgot. Okay. Types of group policy objects, you should know there's 3 different types. Local GPUs, non-local GPUs, there's starter GPUs. Why do I use starter GPUs? Because they're templates. You have to add them in. You've never done that? Do that. See how it works, right? There's 2 default policies. We have a domain and domain controller group policy objects that you get by default. You link to sites, domains, and OUs, not directly to users groups. And you can also use security filtering if you want to further control this down. So that's really important. The policy application, SDOU, that's what we used to say. Sites, domains, OUs, OU, OU, OU. So what do I mean by that? If I have a policy at the site that says red desktop, at the domain it says green, OU says purple, sub-OU says polka dot, guess what you get? Polka dot desktop. That's only if the settings are the same. If the settings are different, they're cumulative, right? But if you have a same server, and also there's always 3 options, right? We can turn it on, we can turn it off, or we can have pass-through. So basically, when you have the checkbox, right, if we don't configure it, anything else will be there, it will stay the same, or it will pass through. But if you say on or, somebody made a great analogy I was listening to, walking through the light, right? If we all walk through, you flip the switch on, you turn it off, I do nothing, and then you turn it on, right? Mine passed through, and then we get your setting. So think about that light switch, if we all went and did it as we're going out. That's how they apply. But it's site, domain, OU, 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 in that order. They'll give you those scenarios. We had a setting, these types of things. And that picture was really important, too. So this is one of the new features in my blog that I have on the PDF, Force Group Policy Update. You can do it on all computers within domain controllers and all subcontainers. If you choose yes below, users' computer size will be updated on. In this case, I selected one computer. But make sure you know these new features. Also about application restriction policies, publishing versus assigning, right? And notice there is no publishing to computers because computers don't have fingers and they can't publish things, right? So know the difference between publishing versus assigning. Publish to users, assign to users, assign to computers. You can do software removal, software restriction policies, and definitely want to know app locker, what it is and what it does versus the older policies. Key tips to know, and this is really the new stuff. So remote GP update. I can remotely update, know what I can do it to. You have GP infrastructure status. In the past, there used to be an add-on tool called GPO tool, right? And this does a far better job than that. It will give you a lot of cumulative information. And if you got a lot of Windows RT, it has Windows RT support. I know it's a funny one. Had to have a little comedy there. And starter GPUs. So I'm going to leave this last question because I want to get the learning resources because we're in the last couple minutes here, folks. And you can look at that review question. But a couple things real quick. Of course, Born to Learn. The press books are out there, these are really good books. I did not see them here. I apologize. The bookstore I went and looked. Oh, they do? They just put them out, or?
Yeah, they were still unloading before the class.
Oh, do they have the Azure ones too? I was going to grab one of those too. So, okay, yeah, so they're green. They usually stand out. So you got those. TechNet Virtual Labs. Do an Azure subscription. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone and fire up, and then you can just do the wizard and fire up a 2012 R2 server. So TechNet Virtual Labs, lots of good stuff. Virtual Academy, I'm so in love with you guys do Virtual Academy? Oh my God, it's amazing. Jeffrey Snover, the inventor of PowerShell, teaches you PowerShell. Doesn't get any better than that. And then with the owner of PowerShell.org, it's entertaining, it's fun. You do it in 15-minute modules, and then you get little points, for your merit badges and everything. I love Microsoft Virtual Academy. MicrosoftVirtualAcademy.com. Lots of great stuff. So we did a breakdown. A lot amount of material covered. Gave you hopefully some tips in each section. I gave you a couple blogs. One for the upgrade to 2008 with 2012 R2 resources, my group policy blog. And here's the rest of them. And folks, thank you very much for your attention. Good luck. Please fill out your evals. I appreciate it.